Monday came and went, and Antonio Pierce is still the head football coach of your Las Vegas Raiders. We'll talk about that, plus a whole lot more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for January 7th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you're catching us wherever you find your favorite podcast or if you're checking us out on the Locked On Raider podcast YouTube page. We appreciate you either way. If you give us 2 minutes, 22 minutes, or 42 minutes, whatever time you spend with us on the daily, we definitely appreciate it. Got to give a big shout out to my man Ari, who does a great job on the YouTube page. Without him, there is no Locked On Raiders podcast YouTube page. And as I've said many times, we're about 17,000 subscriptions in, and that's a credit to you and my man Ari. So we shout out Ari. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. I'm on Twitter as well, as many of you know, at your boy Q254, and as many of you chime in on, and it makes me laugh, good, bad, or indifferent. It is all good. I tell you, it's a cesspool, but sometimes it becomes a very weird place as well. I found that out on Monday. But again, you can hit me up at your boy Q254, and if you want to chime in on the show, the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line is 707-654-4693. As a matter of fact, we'll close out the show today with your calls and texts. Even got an email that I want to pass along from Raider Nation, so that'll come up. A lot of really good feedback. We'll get that coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about Antonio Pierce, how he is the head football coach still of the Raiders. It's still a fluid situation. It has not been set in stone that he's going to come back for the 2025 season, but as of right now, it's leaning that way. You'll hear from Ian Rappaport. You'll hear from Mike Garafolo from NFL Network, their thoughts on Antonio Pierce, his words that he had to say at the press conference on Monday, his appearance at the press conference on Monday, and I'll give you my feedback on that as well and different reasons why there's a chance that AP could be the head football coach in 2025. We'll do that all in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And it's never too late to get into the action on FanDuel. It doesn't matter if it's the postseason or not. It is all good. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. I'll tell you more about them later on in the show. But it's funny, waking up on Monday, probably woke up around 6 a.m. And, of course, once it's the offseason for teams, you really got to pay attention to see the moving and shaking and see what can go on. So I was very interested to see what was going to happen, if we were going to get some kind of announcement early in the morning before Antonio Pierce had his press conference. He had that at 10:30 or 10:45 on Monday at the Intermountain Health Performance Center. And so I kept thinking, well, I got to make sure, that there's nothing that's changed before that press conference because, well, that could affect whatever we got going on. And that didn't happen. I also had a dentist appointment on Monday at 8 a.m. So no joke, and I never do this. I'm not this guy, and I think it's the rudest thing ever. I'm not the guy to stand there with my phone in my hand and just pay attention to that while I'm, at the dentist or I'm getting my hair cut or something like that. Like I just, if I'm getting my hair cut, like I do every Saturday morning, and you're texting me, I'm just not going to get that text until my haircut's over. But because this situation with Antonio Pierce as the head coach of the Raiders is so serious and so important, and, of course, the press conference was coming up around 10:30, 10:45, I told the hygienist while she was – right before she started cleaning my teeth, I said, look, not trying to be that guy. I'm not trying to be, the rude, disrespectful, patron or whatever, but this is very important. The season just got wrapped up. There's a chance that Antonio Pierce might not come back as the Raiders head coach. They might, move on from him before his press conference. It's scheduled for a couple hours from now. So I'm literally going to have my phone in my hand, and anytime that it vibrates or whatever happens, I have to pay attention to it. So I'm not being rude to you. I'm just saying. And she was like, oh, it's cool. I get it. No problem. And she's like, I'm not even a big football fan. I'm a baseball fan. So do what you got to do. So that was cool. But I felt bad because, again, it looked rude. I'm just standing there with my phone in my hand. I was like, oh, nope, never mind. That was about the Jaguars. Nope, that's about the Giants. Nope, that's about someone else. But that's, because, again, situations are so fluid. And as I mentioned multiple times on Monday's show, by the time you're listening to this, things could have changed, right? And so today, by the time you're listening to this, things could have changed because, again, nothing is set in concrete. But as of Monday, Antonio Pierce was still the head football coach of the Raiders. We met with him. We talked to him for a pretty lengthy amount of time, probably about 15 minutes, and then we went into the Raiders locker room as they had their clean out process. Now, one of the notes that I did see when I picked up my phone and was checking was that the Jaguars moved on from Doug Peterson. That's not a big surprise. It was rumored, but it hadn't happened yet. Then that happened. The Patriots, they moved on from Gerard Mayo. They did that on Sunday. That was a surprise, but it's not a surprise because they're putting the full court press on Mike Vrabel. Bears, Jets, and Saints were already open midseason. So now there's currently 5 head coaching positions that are open. Now, I had mentioned Brian Daboll of the Giants on Monday's show. If he gets moved on from, then maybe he can be Antonio Pierce's or anyone else's offensive coordinator, right? If they decide to make some moves there. Well, Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, both of the New York Giants, are returning. That's the GM and the head coach. So Daboll is going to stay in New York. John Mara, the owner there, he put his stamp of approval on those two returning, saying he's growing impatient, but they are returning for 2025. And as I mentioned, as you know, Antonio Pierce is still the head football coach of the Raiders. We met with him on Monday, and, he said that at the time we had met with him, he still hadn't sat down and talked with Mark Davis, so that's why I say it's still a fluid situation. But as I've mentioned multiple times, he's got to lay out the plan. Right? This is what went wrong. This is why it went wrong. This is how we're going to correct it. If, in fact, he's going to return in 2025. And as I mentioned, that's still a very fluid situation. But we'll talk more about that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Also, the Raiders got their offseason started. They signed 12 to reserve future signings. And you're going to see a lot of this throughout the course of the offseason. They do it every year. They'll do it heading into free agency. They're just making sure that they have their guys. I like to say camp bodies, but some of them are notable names that, can contribute on the team or will contribute on the team. Like MJ Devonshire, he was one. Tyreek McAllister, he was one. Those are guys that are household names. Isaiah Spiller is a guy that you're familiar with. Dalton Wagner, remember he was the tackle out of Arkansas. He was the guy that they signed to a reserve future signing. Christian Wilkerson, the wide receiver, he's a guy. David Agoha, he was one. Remember, he was on the international program. So there was 12 of those guys that they signed. I'm not saying those are going to be big-time contributors in 2025, but it's just how they start to put the roster together once the offseason begins. And then you'll see other guys get signed. You'll see some of these guys that I just mentioned possibly dropped moving forward. That's just kind of the ebbs and flow of the offseason. So you'll hear about a lot of those. I'm not going to go over every single name because, again, at the end of the day, a lot of these guys won't even make it to training camp. Now, the ones I mentioned, they'll make it to training camp. They'll probably have a role, if nothing else, practice squad later on. But, Dalton Wagner's one that I'm interested in. He's a big 6'8", 320-pound tackle out of Arkansas. The problem with him is he's often injured, and he was injured last year. He was injured the year in 2023 when the Raiders signed him as an undrafted free agent. So that's kind of who he consistently is a guy who's injured. But maybe he can be a guy making on the practice squad and end up, playing a role later on in 2025 as, some depth or whatever like that. I don't think that they'll put him as a consistent tackle. But that's just me, and it's only, January 7th, and we're talking about this. So there's that. Also, my final note for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast news and notes of the day, Max Crosby, he won the Commitment to Excellence Award again. He's now won that 4 seasons in a row. He's been given that honor, and it's presented annually to the Raider who best exemplifies hard work, leadership, and excellence on and off the field throughout the course of the season. And obviously, there's still questions to be had about Max Crosby and what they're going to do with his contract. He still has years on his deal, but he doesn't have any guaranteed money, and he's let it be known he wants to address that. And he also wants to know the plan, right? Like I've been talking about Antonio Pierce, the plan, how they're going to win games, how they're going to turn this thing around and not be a 4-13 team or, a 6-11 team or one of these underachieving teams that doesn't mean make the postseason. So that's what I got for you for segment number 1. Coming up in segment number 2, you'll hear from Ian Rappaport. You'll hear from Mike Garofalo from NFL Network, their thoughts and what they're hearing on AP and his job security if he's coming back in 2025. You'll hear them talk about what he wore in his press conference on Monday as well. And, of course, I'll give my feedback and my thoughts as well. We'll do that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about PrizePicks. And it's playoff time. If you're like me, you want to make the most of the final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats, like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions with a B in winnings, it's clear that people love the platform. Here's a special offer for all Locked On Raider podcast listeners. Well, Locked On NFL listeners as well, but don't tell everybody else. Download the app today. Use the promo code Locked On NFL. It's all one word to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Again, download the app today. Use the promo code Locked On NFL, all one word, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. As we know, Antonio Pierce is still the head football coach of the Raiders, and that's the one big domino to drop. And we've seen some organizations like the Dolphins, they come out and have their ownership, seal the deal and stamp of approval on the head coach, on the GM. Yes, these guys are coming back. I mentioned the Giants did that. The Dolphins did that. A couple other programs or teams have done that. The Raiders have not done that. That does not mean that Antonio Pierce is not safe. That does not mean that he is safe, right? It's just kind of a wait and see type situation. But it feels like to me, and again, it's just me, it's just a gut feeling, that the Raiders would not have rolled Antonio Pierce out there to talk to the media on Monday if they weren't thinking about bringing him back, if they weren't heavily leaning in the direction of bringing him back. I believe that they are. I also believe that the fact that the Patriots fired Gerard Mayo and they're going to put the full court press on Mike Vrabel, I also think that plays a role. That actually might have saved Antonio Pierce's job. Now, I don't know that from a place of like some source or some knowledge. It's just Q and his gut feeling. I just think that, as I mentioned on Monday's show, if you were able to tune in, we appreciate that, that I think if you're not going to have AP and his inexperience, that you need to go with someone completely opposite with extra experience. And Mike Vrabel has that. I think he'd probably be the best guy for the job. If you're not going to have AP, Mike Vrabel probably would be the best guy for the job. So with his relationship with Tom Brady, I feel like somehow, I don't know how, right, that the word got out that he probably would covet the Patriots job more than the Raiders job, and they realized, okay, wait, that guy, the guy with all the experience, the guy that had a history of winning in Tennessee with, so-so quarterback play like Ryan Tannehill, rather go to New England than come to Las Vegas. Just my gut feeling, that's what I feel like, played somewhat of a role, because, again, as I mentioned on Monday's show, if you're going to go veteran route, who are you going to go? Pete Carroll, I know that name's been floated out there. Vinny Bonsignore, who I respect a lot, has mentioned him a couple names. I'm like, so-so on Pete Carroll, right? Mike McCarthy, I know the Bears have asked for permission to interview him. I think he ends up back with the Cowboys. Not huge on Mike McCarthy anyway. I don't think he's a game changer when it comes to a head coach. There's a couple other guys. Brian Flores, he's being requested. But again, and he has head coaching experience, but it wasn't really a lot of huge success, right? So, there's a couple guys out there, but not really, as far as I'm concerned, one that's a game changer like Mike Vrabel would have been, right? Mike Vrabel, everyone, attributes him to being a really smart, heady football coach that knows all the rules, right, and knows them inside and out. And so there's a lot of things that he brings to the table that every other coach does not have. But again, for my money, I feel like he's going to go back to New England. But I found this to be pretty interesting. As Antonio Pierce, he appeared at his press conference on Monday, and he was wearing the old school Raiders starter jacket, like way back in the day. I want to say I was in high school. Right? Back in the day, I was like Ahmad. Back in the day when I was young, I'm not a kid anymore. But sometimes I sit back and wish I was a kid again. Yeah, remember that? That was like back in 92, 91, 93 maybe? I graduated in 94, so that's the reference right there. But he was rocking that old school starter Raiders jacket. And it's funny that Ian Rappaport, Mike Garafolo, Tom Pelissero on NFL Network, they spent so much time just talking about his jacket. But then finally they got down to the business side of things with Antonio Pierce still being the head football coach of the Raiders. Here's what Rap Sheet and Garafolo had to say about that.
Pierce is still the coach. He's up there wearing that cool jacket. If things continue this way, and to me, you watch the players play, you talk to people who work with them. There's some early Dan Campbell vibes here, just because how terrible the team is, but how absolutely hard they play and how young this roster is. I mean, Tom Telesco's draft class really, really good, and all these dudes were out there playing, having no earthly idea what they're doing, but still somehow getting out a couple wins. As it stands right now, he is still the coach, and it certainly seems like that's the direction it's going, although Mark Davis has yet to come out and say it officially, as we've seen some other teams do.
Yeah, I'm thinking of us wearing starter jackets right now, and I'm steal the line from Pulp Fiction, one of the ones I can quote here. What do they look like, Jimmy? Couple of dorks. But in regard to the jacket, I do think that there's a message behind the jacket. I do. Because Antonio Pierce in his press conference was talking about trusting his gut a little bit more. I think he got away from some of the things that made him successful as an interim coach. He came in there guns a-blazing, right? Like, just, I'm going to be Antonio Pierce, the guy who wore the Raiders jacket growing up, the guy who was with, NWA he talked about in his press conference when he got the interim job, growing up with those guys. So I think he wants to get back to a little bit more of that. As a head coach, sometimes you're pressured into not necessarily being yourself. And he talked about times he didn't trust his gut this past year. He's going to try to do that. So I think it wasn't just a fashion thing. I think there was a message behind that quote today.
So there you go. Again, it's nothing that's concrete. Like, there's no doubt about it that he's returning. But you heard what Rap Sheet had to say about how it feels like, and he started talking about Dan Campbell. And I know some Raider Nation gets annoyed when they hear Dan Campbell and AP kind of the references and comparing the two, because it's not quite apples to apples. I get that. But again, that's not me saying it. I'm not force feeding it. I'm just bringing you the sound. I'm bringing you, the information and allowing you to digest it however you choose to. Now, what I did find interesting is what Mike Garafolo had to say about Antonio Pierce wearing that starter jacket. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, what does it matter what he's wearing to a press conference, right? He either is the coach or he isn't. But I agree with Mike G, where he said that there was some significance. And I think AP is the kind of guy that doesn't do anything without a purpose. He's wearing that old school starter jacket, and what Mike G said about his gut feeling and getting back to who he was and, getting back to what he was when he was an interim coach. That's what he talked about. That's what AP mentioned in his press conference when he said that what he learned is that he needs to go with his gut feeling more than something else, right? And I'm just paraphrasing. I don't know the exact phrase, but basically, something that people called into this show many times, texted in this show many times, or tweeted at me many times, that he's not doing what he did as an interim. He's not being the Antonio Pierce that everyone fell in love with, or, some people fell in love with. A lot of people didn't, apparently. But, he wasn't that guy. He wasn't rolling with his gut. He wasn't, kind of just letting it rip. And, and question, why doesn't he do that? He needs to get back to doing that. And that symbolism of that jacket, like Mike G said, and I hadn't really thought about it until I heard him say that, it makes sense. And it's funny, and you'll understand this and appreciate it if you've been listening to this show for a while. I always say that you're supposed to have a red polo in the closet, right? When you need to make a statement, when you need to have that power day, when you need to, pop out and show someone, right? It's that red polo day. And I know that, red doesn't go with the Raiders. That's fine. But I got plenty of the red polos in the closet. And people know when Q's wearing the red polo, it's for a reason, right? He's doing it for a purpose. Matter of fact, I think tomorrow or Wednesday or sometime this week, I'm about to do it. I'm about to show someone. I'm about to pop out and show them with the red polo. I don't know exactly when it's going to be, but it's going to happen sometime this week. That's for sure. But to the point of what he was saying about the jacket, it's AP getting back to AP, right? And it's funny when he said that about getting back to listening to his gut and going with his gut feeling. The way I took that in the press conference in real time was that he was trying to do things too perfect. And what I mean by that is when you're the interim coach, what are the expectations? Oh, you're just going to coach out the rest of the season. Then you're going to go off into the wind. There'll be a new head coach in place. Everything will change, right? So he didn't have anything to lose because you're not supposed to be there anyway. And how many of us have been in that position in real life when you feel like, you know what, I have nothing to lose. Let me just go let it rip, right? Let me just go be me. And then when you're you have good results. But when you try to do something extra and try to be too good or too perfect, or you know how they say you're getting too cute? When you try to get too cute, that's when you start to mess up. And all I can think of and all I can ever bring to the table is my own personal experiences, because I'm only me. I can't be anyone else. I can't be you. So I can only bring my own experiences. But when I went from doing, local radio, and all of a sudden I have an opportunity to be on ESPN National, well, that's a bigger stage, right? It's a big deal. It's ESPN National. And so my first few shows, I was a little nervous, easing into it. I was trying to be perfect. Didn't want to mess up. Didn't want to say the wrong thing. Didn't want to say the wrong stat. I feared making a mistake because I'm like, well, this is the only chance I get. I might not get that opportunity. And then finally I was like, wait, I'm just doing radio. I'm just doing what I've been doing my whole life, is talking. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm talking on national radio, if I'm talking on local radio, if I'm doing a podcast, or if I'm talking in my living room. Just do what you know how to do. Stop overthinking things. And I honestly believe, and this is not giving AP a pass at all. It doesn't give him a mulligan. It doesn't say, well, now you understand that you can't do that, and you get that doesn't, right? And Mark Davis might very well say, yeah, that sounds good. I'm glad you understand the mistakes you made, but that's still not good enough. And that would be fine. Sometimes you only get one crack at that thing. And if you don't get it right, then you just don't get it right. But I like the fact that at least the feeling I got was he needs to get back to being him. And that's the biggest thing. I had people call my radio show on Monday and said, Q, tell me one thing that Antonio Pierce did that was so impressive that you think that he should come back in 2025. And I was like, to be honest with you, nothing. I don't think he did anything that was so impressive that he needs to come back in 2025. I think the one thing he did do is what you heard from the players on Monday's show, that he kept the team together when they were in a skid, when they were in a 10-game losing streak. He kept them fighting, he kept them scratching, he kept them clawing, and those weren't my words, that was theirs. They said that the way that he, pumped them up and got them going, and I even asked them on Monday, and I received from Laker E some weird disrespectful comment because I guess I'm some Antonio Pierce apologist for asking him what he did in particular, because, well, I wanted to know. I thought it was interesting. If the players in the locker room have all said, hey, Antonio Pierce kept us together, okay, well, what did he do? And I asked those players, as you heard on Monday's show, but I wanted to ask Antonio Pierce because maybe there was something there. And, he gave a pretty good answer about it, but, he also credited them for wanting to fight and scratch and claw. But he admitted it's not easy. You're getting up in front of these guys, you're giving them the same message, or you're giving them a message, and they continue to lose. Sometimes that message falls on deaf ears. Like, at what point do you get tired of hearing someone where it's like, talk, you understand, then all of a sudden at some point, it's like, wah, 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 right? Everything sounds like that. And you tell me what I just said. Nothing, right? I'll wait. Wah, 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 wah. Explain what that meant, right? I mean, nobody knows, because it all becomes just background noise. So for him to be able to do that was good. Now, there was a lot of decisions that weren't good. He mentioned, basically in his presser that Aiden O'Connell should have been the starter. As many of you have said, Aiden O'Connell should have been the starter. Again, I go back to, I think that had more to do with the fact that Gardner Minshew got paid $15 million guaranteed, fully guaranteed. It was close. As a guy that was at training camp, nobody took the lead in the competition. They just didn't. Neither one of the guys played very well. And so it's almost like in baseball where tie goes to the runner, tie goes to the guy that makes the most money. I'm not saying that that's right, but that's the reality of it. And I don't think that was fully an Antonio Pierce decision on his own. I think that he'll take the blame for it because he really has to. But I don't think that was him exclusively making that decision. So we still don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm sure we'll find out sooner rather than later. I don't think too many days are going to linger by without there being some kind of decision, because look, if you are going to move on, you got to get your name in the hat, man. You got to start calling some folks up. I'm sure there's some back channel information going on, seeing if there's some guys that they would be interested in, if they can get them or not. I'm sure that's going on, because it always is. Right? I mean, that's stuff that you do no matter what walk of life you're in. If you're in the position to hire someone, you reach out to see if that person's interested before you get rid of what you have. I know I'm not the only one that's done that. Right? I mean, I don't know how many times I've been reached out to, like, hey, Q, we're thinking about making this move. Would you be interested in this job? Yeah, sure, I would. Or nah, not really. Okay, cool. Just calling to gauge your interest. That happens in every walk of life, every one of them. So I'm sure that they're doing that as well. And again, sooner rather than later, we'll find out what's going on with Antonio Pierce and how they move forward. Who's going to be the OC? Who's going to be the DC, right? Is the staff going to get condensed a little bit? He mentioned that he didn't have any plans as of today, which was Monday, of changing his staff. As of today is the key words there. I do expect a lot of changes to be made with that staff if, in fact, he's back in 2025. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts, and even an email. What's on your mind? 707-654-4693. We'll close out the show hearing from you, Raider Nation. It's the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the show, and that is Gametime. And I don't know about you, but I love to go to live events, sports, music, theater, comedy, whatever the case may be, right? I mean, you can have a lot of fun, and I know I have a lot of fun at live events because the energy and the excitement, they are unforgettable. It's just, especially if it's a good show or a good game, you're going to remember that, and it's going to stick with you for a while. Well, Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So there's all kind of different options. Again, concerts, sports, theater, comedy shows. Comedy shows are some of the best to go to, right? You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets right now with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all one word for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create the account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Say it with me, everyone. Game time. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a call from Sacktown Mark. He's representing the 916. He's calling to take a different approach to the offseason and the draft from what we've been talking about lately as it stands with the Raiders sitting at the number 6 overall pick. Here's Sacktown Mark.
Hey, Q. This is Sacktown Mark. Well, the season's over, and I have a prediction for what's going to happen in the off season, and I wanted to get your opinion on it. One, to see if it's viable, and two, just to get your thoughts on it. But I was thinking how possible would it be for the Raiders to just trade down in the draft and then accumulate more picks for 2026, so that way they're able to be undeniable, basically, when it comes to drafting the quarterback that they want in that draft. Because I was listening to yesterday's podcast, and somebody called in saying how it seems like this year's draft is going to kind of turn out the same way as it was for us last year. And one way to ensure that that doesn't happen in 2026, and I know we're looking way far ahead, but you kind of have to when you think about the draft and acquiring players, right? But one way to ensure that doesn't happen is by trading back in this year's draft, acquiring picks, so that way you can put forth a grandfather offer to whatever team you want to trade with in the 2026 draft to get your quarterback then. Because everyone's talking about Arch Manning, and he probably will be the number 1 pick next year, barring some wild stuff happening in the next college season. But there probably will be some other quarterbacks that are coming out too that we will be excited about as the 2026 draft gets closer. And I know I'm talking about far in advance, but again, we got to kind of, when talking about acquiring players and acquiring picks, like, you have to go at a year-by-year basis. So I was just wondering how possible do you think that would be for the Raiders to just trade back from the 6th pick down with another team to acquire more picks? And also, if you would want them to do that, how do you feel about that? Like, would you be annoyed if they did make that move and just didn't take best player available? Because we know Tom Telesco isn't the type of GM to trade up. I don't think he's ever done that. But he's definitely traded back. So just wanted to get your thoughts, Q. Again, thank you for all that you do, and thank you, Ari. And go Raiders.
Sacktown, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a path to do that, right? If a team below the Raiders, anyone below the Raiders, has their eyes on a particular player. Like, it's just the same thing as trading up, right? You've got to have a dance partner, right? I mean, when I was, a youngster coming up, right, I'd go to the prom and I'd get it and they'd be like, oh, it's time to dance. The music go on. But you got to have a dance partner. You can go out there on the dance floor and dance by yourself, but at some point, right? I mean, where are you going to get? Nowhere. So you got to have a dance partner, right? You got to have someone that wants to dance with you. And as a youngster, I didn't know one that wanted to dance with me. Last year in the draft, the Raiders didn't have anyone that wanted to dance with them, right? The teams at the top all needed quarterbacks, and they didn't want to dance with a team that was picking number 13 overall. I'll say this. If the Raiders are trying to trade up, and you're right, Tom Telesco hasn't traded up, number two overall could be a spot. Cleveland, I think, would be very interested in trading back. So that's one to pay attention to. Right now, the Raiders have 10 draft picks, and they have over $100 million in cap space. So they have the weapons and the tools, and they have draft picks that are worth a lot too, right? It's not just 10 draft picks, but they have valuable draft picks, very, very high up, 6th overall, 7th overall, right? They have those in each round. So they're very high. They can do a lot of different things they want, but to trade back, they just need to have a trade partner, someone who's just really hell-bent off of getting to that top spot or to that number 6 overall spot. And you know when that probably would happen? I would say after the combine. After someone falls in love with a workout warrior, they'll see someone and they'll say, oh, man, look at this dude go out there and perform. We need to have that guy. And that's when you can cash in and get someone. So we'll see if they're interested in doing that. I don't know if they're going to be interested in doing that, but it's definitely a possibility. And if they're not in love with one of those quarterbacks and they don't think that that's the quarterback of the future, I wouldn't have no problem with them trading back and stacking up the team. There's no doubt about that. Thanks so much for the call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got an actual email. My man reached out and said, hey, I'm sending you an email, and he did. This comes from Luis, and he said, matter of fact, what did he say? Well, here it is. Love the show. Listen to it every episode while at work. I feel AP is getting unjust blame for the disappointing season. He should shoulder some blame for sure and hopefully learns from his mistakes. I think the organization has more to blame for this season than AP does. Reason being, they let Cliff Kingsbury leave over an additional year on his contract. The Raiders got cheap, and Cliff left for Washington. This is the primary reason we ended up with Getsy. Getsy's offense was not good. Full of 3-and-outs, turnovers, predictability, play calling, etc. This kept the defense on the field, and as a result, they get tired and couldn't stop every opponent from scoring. Even when Turner took over Getsy's scheme, too little too late. I think if we give Cliff his 3-year deal, he stays, installs an offense, and with that, we have a better offensive start to the season by scoring more points, maintaining drives, keeping the defense fresh to end games. AP was right in his desire to have Cliff be the OC, and he was right to want Jaden. I doubt Washington trades out of that number 2 spot, so that would not have been controllable. However, letting Cliff walk was controllable. And to me, and I'll stop right there. To me, those two go together. Right, I think Cliff Kingsbury realized the Raiders had no path to getting the quarterback that he wanted, and that was really the 2-year deal was his way out. That was his loophole. Yeah, you know what? I need 3 years. Oh, I'm only going to get 2 years. I don't want that. He knew that he needed a quarterback that wasn't Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. So, okay, picking up with what he said. He said that I doubt Washington trades out. Oh, we already talked about that. That's what happens when I stop. He said, however, letting Cliff walk was controllable. Okay. However, letting Cliff walk was controllable, and to me, that was the main contributor to the disappointing season. In the end, Getsy got fired, which in turn makes our offseason offensive installation a waste and gave Turner little to work with. Even the camp battle of Minshew O'Connell might not have been so neck and neck if we had Cliff run it. People could say, well, AP chose Getsy. Yeah, but he wanted Cliff. Cliff came and left, and who else was left? They took a gamble that Getsy was not the issue in Chicago. They were wrong. Organizational error, not AP. They need to give AP what he needs. Otherwise, it's the same ish since 2002 at this point. What's one more year of this? Give him what he wants, not what's left as far as OCs goes. Thanks for the show. Sorry for the rant. What do you think about that point of view? And that's from Luis. Hey, thanks for the email. Really good stuff. I guess I could have finished it first before I answered it. But, yeah, I think Cliff and Jaden go hand in hand. I do agree with you, though. He was right in wanting Cliff Kingsbury as the OC. He was right in wanting Jaden Daniels as the quarterback, and he was willing to do whatever to get Telesco to trade up to that number 2 spot. And ultimately, I don't think Washington would have at all trade up to that spot, trade back to 13 and give the Raiders number 2, no matter what they had offered. They could have offered Devontae. They could have offered 3 1s. They could have offered, a lot they could have offered. And I think that Washington still would have said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, because they wanted to make sure that they got Jaden Daniels. But there's no doubt that he absolutely wanted Jaden. So that gives me hope that he at least can identify a really good OC that's out there, and Kingsbury is. So we'll see what goes into that. But he did hire Getsy, and that was on him, and he did have Scott Turner on his staff. So maybe he should have just realized who he had on his staff as opposed to Getsy. But I do think, and this is just me spitballing, I do think Getsy getting hired had a lot to do with keeping Devontae happy. And clearly that didn't work anyway, as Devontae escaped out of Vegas and was on his way to the Jets, because that was a great place to be. And, yeah, they're picking number 7 overall, and the Raiders are picking number 6. I'll leave it at that. One more quick call as we close out the show. Cornhusker Raider, he's calling to talk about AP and what he felt was the biggest issue with the team this season, as AP is still in place as the head coach of the Silver and Black. Here's Cornhusker Raider.
What up, Q? This is Cornhusker Raider here. It's pretty late in the day. I'm listening to your podcast, and I've been watching my phone, seeing if I'm going to get that Bleacher Report notification saying Raiders move on from AP and whatever, but I haven't seen it yet, so maybe that's pretty clear that we might be keeping them for another year, but you never know with the Raiders. But I'm cool with that. I think AP is a solid coach. I mean, look at what Dan Campbell did his first year. Not great. AP technically did better, I believe, as his first full year as a coach. No one's talking about, well, maybe they are, I'm just not hearing. We had a ton of injuries this year, obviously, and AP still rallied the troops. I mean, before the season started, I could have told you each position what the player was, and most of them even the backup for that position. By the end of the season, there's guys out there I'm still Googling because I don't know who they are. And, I mean, AP still rallied his troops and hung in there, and I think because we didn't try and tank the last few games, that if we are going to keep them, we're going to roll with them, and I'm fine with that. But just wanted to call in and give in my 2 cents that I'm cool with it. And next year, if we're a little less injury prone, I think that'd be a way better test than whatever. But either way, excited for the off season. It's always fun, and just win, baby. Cornhusker Raider out.
Thank you for the call. I appreciate you. And yeah, injury was major, right? And I said it before that you play who you have, right? You know, having injuries on your team is not a get out of jail pass. I talked about it on the show. I actually asked the question that, you know, how much weight does the injury carry with you, right? Because again, you see teams that are finding ways to win, like the Lions, even though they have a ton of injuries, right? They obviously have more depth. They have a quarterback that they trust in Jared Goff, who, you know, could be in the MVP conversation, probably should be in the MVP conversation. But the interesting nugget, and I never really brought it back to the table because, again, I'm not trying to use injury as an excuse, right? And Antonio Pierce never used it, but it's a factor. And if you think that it's not a factor, you're wrong, right? As of December 20th, in the regular season, the Raiders were actually tied for first with the Lions with 31.8% of their week 1 starters on IR or out. Let me say that one more time. This was as of December 20th. They were tied with the Lions for first with 31.8% of their week 1 starters on IR or out. Again, no excuse for going 4-13. You know, you play with who's out there, and the Raiders played a very young team due to all those injuries that were in place, but a lot of them were to their starters. And as AP told us, I asked him about Malcolm Kuntz in his press conference on Monday, and he said, man, that hurt our team, right? That Thursday before, the season's getting ready to get started, or the week before the season's about to get started, on that Thursday, Kuntz goes down, and he's out for the whole season. He's like, man, he was right there on the cusp of being that guy. And I had said that I thought he was going to have a better statistical season than Max Crosby. I really did. And so Kuntz to go down with that ACL, that was the beginning of the snowball. And it never stopped throughout the course of the year. That's not a get out of jail pass free, or get out of jail free pass. It's not that at all. Not using it as an excuse, just putting it in as a factor. And there's a lot of factors that went into the Raiders' awful 2024 season, something that they cannot duplicate in 2025. But that's what I got for you on today's show. Thanks so much for all the feedback. Still got a text from Nick T in the 757. We'll get that tomorrow. Got plenty of calls as well. Thanks for all the feedback. Thanks for all the support of the show. Good, bad, or indifferent. We're here each and every day on the Locked On Raiders podcast. And please believe we got plenty to go throughout the course of the offseason, and things are still fluid. They could change at any given notice. So keep your head on a swivel is what I say. It's like you're on special teams. Keep your head on a swivel. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.